Well, hell, another win for the Cowboys. Let's talk about it, but mostly let's speculate on some things that happened. Here we go. What's up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Primetime. I am your host, Mauricio Rodriguez, streaming with you live every Sunday and Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central, and catching up with you Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays with quick-hitting videos. The Cowboys won their sixth game of the season today, and I know, we're not thinking about the number of wins, really. If anything, Cowboys Nation is thinking about how it impacts the draft stock, but still feels nice to have a win on Sunday versus the Carolina Panthers, especially because it was somewhat of an intriguing game. The Panthers had close losses to the Kansas City Chiefs. They should have won versus the Philadelphia Eagles if it wasn't for a drop. So made them a little bit of an intriguing opponent for the Cowboys. And Dallas kind of stepped up in the second half and dominated, honestly. Two ways they dominated specifically, I would say number one is obviously the way that Rico Dowdle ran the football once again was awesome. 149 yards, averaging 6 yards a clip. And then on defense, the dominant level was obvious in the second half as well, with 6 sacks for the game, 4 turnovers in total. And the way they came about these turnovers was very differently, right? Towards the end of the game, Izzy Mukwamo might have gotten a gimme from Bryce Young, but then there was the Marist Liufau peanut punch fumble. There was the Jordan Lewis swatting it away and then falling into the hands of Eric Kendricks. A lot happened in this game, but I think those two things are what stands out the most. Now, regarding the pass rush, we know about Micah Parsons being great and all, had 2 sacks on this game, was pretty effective against the Panthers right tackle, and you got to keep in mind the Panthers offensive line has been much better than anticipated this season. But how about Osa Odighizuwa just straight up balling on Sunday versus the Panthers? He had 4 quarterback hits. He's a defensive tackle. Remember this. Had a sack, had a tackle for a loss, and of course he had a first fumble, which actually happened to be another takeaway there from the Cowboys. So pretty much just a pretty solid game defensively. And that's why I think it leaves the door open, really, for some speculation on our end. And I wanted to get into that on today's show, mostly because I'm thinking about Mike Zimmer right after this game. And let me know what you guys think in the chat about this. But I kind of feel like the Cowboys defense is really clicking at this point of the year. I don't think it's just that the Cowboys have been able to face some lesser opponents, right? I don't think it's that. Because think of the Saints. Think of the Saints game. I don't think that was a much better opponent than what the Cowboys faced today. I really think it's a defense that is coming to terms. I really think it's a defense that's beginning to understand what Mike Zimmer thinks and a lot of that. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. The sack for Jordan Lewis. One of the sacks went for Jordan Lewis on a blitz play. And it wasn't anything that the Cowboys have not been doing, but you got to appreciate the level of detail that you see on Mike Zimmer's defense nowadays. Because we know about the A-gap blitz stuff, right? Where he will have his players basically blitz through either shoulder of the center. But Mike Zimmer is making the most out of his players by blitzing the B-gap as well. We saw that in the preseason and then some in week 1. But this play, Jay was Micah Parsons, so this is Micah. He drops back into coverage, and then Carl Lawson on the other side also drops back into coverage, and then Liufau and Jordan Lewis, the guys that I'm circling right now, both blitz the B-gap. Jordan Lewis ends up getting untouched to the quarterback. And we've seen so many variables of that now for the Cowboys. And I think that's just one example of how things are coming together for these defense. You also saw some better play from Marist Liufau, right, stepping in for the Marvin Overshown, and maybe early in the season, he was playing a little bit out of control out there on the field, and now we're starting to see him really play a more controlled version of his position. And I'm loving what I'm seeing from Mike Zimmer's defense. All of this is to say, are we starting to get the feeling that Mike Zimmer is going to be back in 2025? Let me know what you think in the chat. Yes or no, right now, do you think Mike Zimmer is back in 2025 for the Cowboys? Here's the thing. I think there's three ways that Mike Zimmer can be back in Dallas in 2025. I don't like one of them. I don't like maybe two of them, but there are three ways that this could happen. Number one is the Cowboys keep Mike McCarthy. That is the easiest one. If you don't make a change at head coach, you're unlikely to make a change at defensive coordinator, right? The Cowboys would just run it back. They would extend McCarthy. They would extend Zimmer. And the staff would basically be the same. Maybe the Cowboys fire the O-line coach. Maybe they fire, I don't know, some position coaches as well. But if you bring back McCarthy, then Zimmer is coming back. That's option number one. Option number two is a little bit different. Let's assume Mike McCarthy does not come back. Let's assume Mike McCarthy does not have his contract renewed, whatever. And maybe the Cowboys, whoever they bring in, who from what we know is likely going to be someone that fits the same mold that they've been looking for. So kind of like an experienced coach that has done the job before. Some people mentioned guys like Mike Vrabel. Some people mentioned Bill Belichick a few days ago, but of course that ship has sailed now that he took the job over at North Carolina. But guys that have done the job, right? Whoever they do bring in, maybe they tell them, hey, if you take this job and Zimmer is DC, we're not giving you the power to choose the DC. On the one hand, you might like that. On the other hand, I don't think Cowboys Nation would necessarily feel like you finally have a head coach that is going to do things his way and his way only. So it's going to be hard to buy into the idea that all things are going to be totally different with this new head coach. But that is a strong possibility. However, that the Cowboys, if they bring in an offensive-minded head coach, that maybe they're like, okay, Mike Zimmer is going to stay as DC, and you have no say in it. Especially based on the last couple of hires they've made at DC, those have been front office hires. They were not Mike McCarthy hires, right? McCarthy brought in Mike Nolan in 2020, lasted 1 year, and then the Cowboys hired Dan Quinn. That was not a Mike McCarthy hiring. That was a Cowboys front office hire. Same goes for Mike Zimmer. Anyways, option number three is Mike McCarthy is gone and you make Mike Zimmer head coach. That is my least favorite one, personally. I like what Mike Zimmer is doing. I think the defense is starting to improve a lot. I think things are starting to click. And if you look historically throughout the NFL at teams with first-year defensive coordinators, it usually takes some time to see that efficiency really hit and to see that adjustment be made by players. I would like it if they find a reasonable way to make Mike Zimmer stay, but promoting him to head coach is one that I wouldn't appreciate personally, because I think you would mostly be, I mean, obviously it would depend as well on who is the offensive coordinator that they bring in that scenario. But I don't know that is the path that the Cowboys want to take, honestly. I think not a lot would change if you just promoted Mike Zimmer to head coach. Plus, we've seen time and time again that a coordinator that is having success as coordinator is not necessarily going to do the same at head coach, right? We've seen some exceptions, of course, but I think Mike Zimmer coaching defense and just coaching defense is the best thing that you can have. And honestly, I don't think you're going to be in any competition with other NFL teams that want to take away Mike Zimmer. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. I'm not even sure Mike Zimmer wants to be a head coach, unless if it's offered. I mean, you would assume he would be interested. But you know what I mean. Think about Big Fangio, right? Big Fangio looks to me like a guy that is just happy coaching defense. And I don't think that he necessarily wants to dive back into the head coaching stuff. From what we've heard, Fangio is just comfortable calling defenses. And that might be the same scenario for Mike Zimmer. Of course, we're just speculating here, but that's what the title of the video uh, warned everyone about, right? When they started watching these videos. So that's fair. We're in speculative territory. But yeah, that's one of my main takeaways from this game. Like the defense starting to play better. We've seen it consistently now for a few games. And I think there might be something there as to this defensive staff might stick around for 2025, whatever happens with head coach Mike McCarthy. Whether he's still around as well or whether he is replaced, I could totally see the Cowboys being like, I mean, sure, we'll bring in a new head coach, but Mike Zimmer is going to stick around. Could happen. Could totally happen. Shout out to everyone who is tuning in into the show. Thank you for being here. Shout out to Joe, who says, hello and good evening, Mauricio and Cowboys Nation. Hope everyone is having a blessed and wonderful day. Shout out to Yo. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it as always. But moving forward a little bit, that's not the only thing that I wanted to speculate on. I wanted to talk about Osa. I mentioned his basically his stats a little bit ago. 4 QB hits. He had 1 sack. He had a tackle for loss, a forced fumble. Osa Odighizuwa is reminding everyone that it's his turn as well in 2025. In fact, it might be his turn more so than it is Micah Parsons. And I don't mean that in a way where, he's going to be a priority over Micah, because he shouldn't be, because Micah is very important for his deal to get done. But Osa is hitting the market in March, right? Micah is under contract for 2025. And of course, if there's not a deal in place, he's likely going to hold out. He's likely going to go through all the same drama that CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott already went through. But Micah has some time to get a deal in place. He can miss OTAs, no problem. They can negotiate over the summer. They can do all that. With Osa, you cannot really do that. You have to do something before free agency kicks off. Now, there's many things he can do, but there's one certainty. There's one truth. Osa Odighizuwa is getting paid. Joe said it. Osa is making himself some money, and I agree. Osa is making himself some money, whether it's in Dallas or it is elsewhere. That's been true for a while now. I think we entered the 2024 season knowing that. But this run that he's in, where he's one of the defensive tackles with the most pressures over the last 4 weeks, where he's putting together a game as dominant as he did today, where he cannot be stopped, I think that's taking it to the next level now, because he's been on a run now for a few weeks. He's been on a run now. The problem is defensive tackle prices have gone up in the last couple of years. You're talking about Osa potentially looking at $25 million per year, $27 million per year. That kind of zone where the top 10 defensive tackles are, could totally see that happening with Osa. And I think he deserves it. I do think he's a pretty good honestly great defensive tackle at 3 technique. He might be limited in some senses that, for example, with the weight and stuff, he's not going to be the biggest DT, but he's very athletic and he can be an impact maker. And we've seen him be an impact maker. And I think the fact that he's raised also his playing time, snap count wise, is going to help him out a lot. The question becomes, can the Cowboys afford to keep him? They can, if they really wanted to. But do they want to? And again, it's not going to be cheap. And I think even franchise tagging him to buy themselves some time is not going to be necessarily easy for the Cowboys. So to me, it's becoming a situation where I'm nowhere near as certain that they're going to keep Osa Odighizuwa around than I am with a star like Micah. And I know people are asking Micah about what Stephen Jones said, and technically did not rule out trading away Micah Parsons. Something that I struggle with, because you read the quote and you actually kind of realize that they did kind of rule it out. Ian Rappaport published a story on NFL Network, for those who missed it, where Stephen Jones basically says it's hard to imagine a scenario where Micah isn't wearing a helmet. But because Stephen Jones said what he always says about looking at every option always, and that it would be irresponsible not to look at any options, people took that as, oh, They're not ruling it out. But I don't know. I think it's a non-story, if I'm being real with you. I think we've learned by now the Cowboys are going to keep these guys, right? Just like they did CD and Dak after a whole year of total drama. So the way that I see it is Micah is absolutely going to get his contract extension in 2025. Osa is not the same at all. Like Osa could totally be gone in 2025, which is why, and I caught a lot of flack for this on Twitter, particularly when I posted this article earlier in the year. That's why I had Osa as a trade candidate for the Cowboys at this year's deadline. A lot of people were going like, hey, well, Osa is the only guy at defensive tackle that we have. And it's true. He's the only impact maker that there is there so far. But my logic was, if you're not going to keep him in 2025, might as well get something in return for him. Might as well get some sort of draft compensation from a team like the Vikings, who are desperate for some defensive tackle help. But anyways, they did not trade him away. And if they don't re-sign him in 2025, I will think that is going to be one of the most overlooked huge mistakes that the Cowboys would have made. Because I think a guy like Osa might have gotten you at least a fourth rounder, maybe even a third rounder, depending on whether or not there was a bidding war. But I think that might end up being a mistake from the Cowboys, because by the trade deadline, we kind of knew what direction this season was going in, especially with Dak Prescott out for the year and all that. Because it wasn't confirmed, but we pretty much knew that Dak Prescott was not going to come back, right? So yeah, I think Osa's future is very interesting. And that's one of the things that I couldn't stop thinking as he was chasing after Bryce Young on this game and making some plays here and there. Thomas says, if he gets that elsewhere, God bless him, but we can tie that kind of money up in someone that isn't a difference maker. And Joe says, in all honesty, I don't think we keep him. He will make his money with another team. And it's a tough decision. It really is. It's a lot of money. I will say that. And I will say that maybe the Cowboys might want to save that and spend it elsewhere. But it's also a tough situation where Stephen Jones is talking about 2025 being a tight year for them, spending-wise, just like 2024 was. And if you're going into the offseason with that mindset, what does that mean about your expectations, football-wise, for the 2025 Cowboys? They're not sounding like they're going to be a contender in 2025. So if you're not going to be a contender in 2025, do you want to tie yourself into a long-term deal with Osa, or do you want to franchise tag him and maybe find a way to trade him before the season starts? It's going to be quite the narrative regarding Osa, especially because I think if you listen to the clues and if you realize that there are so many needs for this Cowboys team, they might need some draft picks, honestly. It's going to be tough. And then John brings something very interesting that relates to Osa, I would say. What about D-Law? I feel we trade him while we can get a decent pick in return. Now, unfortunately, John, you really cannot trade D-Law because D-Law is also going to become a free agent. So the Cowboys cannot trade him. They cannot trade him. That chip sailed at the trade deadline. And so did Osa, unless they franchise tag him. So trading D-Law is not going to be an option. But it does bring up another interesting conversation where it's like, so you're going into this free agency period, and you got to take care of Osa, and you got to take care of D-Law if you want them to return. And you're also thinking about a contract extension for Micah Parsons. They're not going to get those 3 deals done. They're just not gonna. So if it comes down to D-Law or Osa, who is it going to be? Personally, I would probably opt for Osa, and that's no disrespect to D-Law, who I think is one of the most underrated defensive ends in the NFL, although health might be an issue now and something to talk about. But you have your difference maker at edge. And you don't have anything, a defensive tackle, really beyond Osa. And I think Osa is pretty good. So that's just my take on it. I would rather have that impact maker on the interior as well. So they cannot trade D-Law, but I think these decisions are all related to each other. And maybe the Cowboys could also be like, well, F it. What if we go all in on the defense, right? To try to make life easier for this team. And what if we extend Osa and we extend Micah and then we use our first round pick on a defensive lineman, and there's going to be the Michigan defensive tackle, for example, which the Cowboys might be getting themselves out of that range, although it's also December and nobody knows really what the range of these players is really going to look like by the time we get to April. But if you go all in that sense on the defense, it might make some sense. But then if you're doing that, what are you really doing with Mike Zimmer, which we talked about earlier in the show? It's gonna be a decision that the Cowboys. I would like the Cowboys to go into 2025 with a clear vision of what they want to do in terms of team building, because I think they've been missing that. But anyways, moving on from the speculation side of things, some takeaways from this game. Really quickly, gonna run through some of this. I really, really, really liked what we saw out of Marist Liufau in this game. I'm really encouraged by it. I'm still very upset about the Marvin Overshown being out for the year and potentially for 2025 even. But Liufau is looking like a player that the Cowboys hit on. And it's still too early to tell, and we shouldn't get overexcited for somebody that is just a third-round rookie that has not played a whole lot. But what I like about Liufau and what I'm encouraged by is that he is not the same player he was in the first 3 weeks of the season. Remember when we were complaining about Overshown not being played over the rookie, and we were like, why the heck is Overshown on the bench? That was because we wanted to see Overshown on the field, and that was also because Liufau did not seem to be comfortable, on the gridiron. He was, I don't want to say that he was lost from a football IQ point of view, because that is actually his strength when he's on the field. But just athletic-wise, he maybe wanted to get to one gap and just couldn't quite make it. He couldn't weave through traffic as easily as someone like Eric Kendricks with that veteranship really knew how to do it. And Liufau just looks much more comfortable in that area now. You can see him, the play where the Panthers are running to their right, and then Liufau is coming from the backside and shooting the gap in the perfect moment. That is the kind of thing you want to see from Liufau. He's not the missile that Overshown is, but he's learning to play some controlled football. And because he's so smart and he knows the defense, he's going to be in the right spot at the right time. And then you sprinkle in some of that playmaking ability that he showed with the peanut punch to Bryce Young to make that fumble, to force that fumble. You got yourself a football player. I'm excited about what Liufau is showing. So that's one of my biggest takeaways from the game. Another of my biggest takeaways, man, Cooper Rush did not play great. I know he kind of bounced back in the second half, had himself 2 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb was bailing him out early in this game. First half, CeeDee had over 100 yards alone. He had over 50% of the receiving yards or passing yards from Cooper Rush. All of those went to CeeDee. And the most impressive part for me was, think about that drive where he ends up catching that touchdown, which he makes an elite level adjustment for. He had 3 third down catches on that drive. Go back and watch those. All of them were not really easy catches. He was adjusting for Cooper Rush. I just got to hand it to CeeDee, man. He has been awesome for Dallas, and I know maybe he disappeared a little bit in the second half. He's also been playing hurt, and you could see him in pain today. But really just some good stuff from CeeDee. And then Cooper Rush bounced back in the second half after the fumble, which was pretty inexplicable for me. How did he fumble that football? No Panther was even like 5 yards within him. And it was just wild to see that fumble. But bounced back, made one of his best throws ever to Jalen Brooks, bailing from the pocket, rolling to his right, and just throwing it into traffic and threading the needle for Jalen Brooks. That was awesome. And then there was the play where Jalen Tolbert is wide open, and he kind of, Tolbert does get his feet in and controls his body very well on that play, which is something that we haven't necessarily seen from Tolbert. That was encouraging as well. But regarding Tolbert, I still want to see more. There was that 3rd and 9 1-on-1 shot where he's playing ISO ball 1-on-1 with the corner on the right side. And man, he's got to catch that football. It's a contested throw. Tolbert doesn't haul it in. And yeah, like those kind of plays are the ones with Tolbert where I'm like, I just have a tough time. I just have a tough time betting on Tolbert becoming the wide receiver 2 of the future for the Cowboys. So I think that's another position that I'm worried about. The Jonathan Mingo trade, by the way, revenge game versus the Panthers. Oh, man. Oh, man. Mingo, they're going to have a tough time justifying that trade, man. They gave up a 4th rounder for Jonathan Mingo. And at the time, people interpreted it as, oh, they were buyers at the deadline. And I never saw it that way. That's something that we talked about on primetime at the time. And we were talking about how, well, they were buyers, but it's mostly a move for the future. They want to see what the guy has. They have not seen what the guy has. Like, Mingo is barely even playing and seeing the field. So really, these few games, they have not shown anything evaluation-wise for the Cowboys. And really, I don't know what that trade was about. Like, I'm starting to wonder, was it just PR related? We're making a move and we're trying to save the season? Or was it really, we want to see what this guy has, and then why are they not even playing him? Honestly, what a weird situation. What a bizarre trade for Jonathan Mingo. And I'm just wondering, what was the plan there? Or was the plan from the start that they would wait until the offseason to really get Mingo involved? It's funny to me, man. But anyways, and then regarding the Cooper Rush ups and downs, Michael Williams says, why don't we play Lance? And I thought at halftime, I really thought, well, you know what? They might do it. After that fumble, I thought to myself, this might be the moment where Trey Lance finally finds his way onto the field. The reason why I thought that was Cooper Rush is up to 8 fumbles this season. That is so bad. Like, that is a terrible number. To give you an idea, Joe Burrow has been nearly perfect. He has 7 fumbles this season, and that is consistently talked about as a weakness for Joe Burrow. Cooper Rush has 8 fumbles in much fewer games, and he's not dropping back nearly as many times as Joe Burrow is per game, right? So my logic was, if you cannot trust Cooper Rush to hold on to the ball, and the biggest issue with Trey Lance is that you're scared that he's going to give it away, do the fumbles scare you to the point where you're just like, screw it, I'm just going to roll with Trey Lance? And I thought for a moment this was the game where we could see it, and then Cooper Rush bounces back. And let me tell you something, Mike McCarthy goes out after the game, talks to the media, and says this about Cooper Rush. You tell me if you expect to see Lance at all this season. This is what Mike McCarthy said. Cooper's reaction, I thought his 2 touchdown throws were huge, big-time throws. They had a good coverage for that particular play, and he just extended the play, had a great patience, and hit Jalen Tolbert in the corner of the end zone. I thought that was a huge, huge play, no different than his second one. He also said, love his poise. He commands the huddle, keeps us in really good place. Cooper Rush is not being benched by Trey Lance by now. And I don't know, Michael, what the answer for your question is, because you're asking, why don't we play Lance? I think that Lance might legitimately be worse. And I would get very excited if they play Lance because he's something different and he's going to bring, he would bring a very different style of offense to the table. And that would be exciting. But I also admit that if there's no improvement to be talked about from August until now, then I don't know that I can tell you that Trey Lance is any better than Cooper Rush. He's flashier, he's more exciting, he's got a more fun gameplay or play style, but I wouldn't call him better. Because I think Trey Lance's decision making has been an issue going back to his rookie year in the NFL. We saw it at San Fran. We saw it even in August of this year. And I don't know that I don't think Cooper Rush is any great, or I mean, even good is not the word that I would use for Cooper Rush. He's a backup at the end of the day. But I think with Trey Lance, maybe you wouldn't be winning some of these games that you've been winning because he's such a wild card. He's such a wild card. He can have that 5 interception game that he had in the preseason. He can totally have it in the regular season as well. And I think the Cowboys just trust Cooper to be like, yep, just manage the game for us and don't really lose it for us. And I think Trey is likelier to lose it for you. And I had someone tell me the other day, oh, he cannot be any worse than Cooper Rush. And the only thing that I could reply was, he was. In the preseason, he was. Trey Lance was not good in the preseason. Had some moments, had some fun runs, had some plays that made you go, damn it, he's athletic. Also had 5 picks in the final game of the preseason, and all of them were ugly. Capital U ugly. Like bad picks. Horrible picks. So yeah, I think that's what's happening with that situation. I do think McCarthy is not going to bench Cooper Rush for the final 3 games of the season. But I would be intrigued. Like, I would really like to see Trey Lance play personally, just from a fun perspective and fan perspective. I would love to see what he's got. And then there's that too. I hear some people say, hey, why not see what he's got? The Cowboys are not gonna benefit from anything that he's got or doesn't, because he's gone in 2025. He's not under contract. He's likely gonna hit free agency and likely is gonna head elsewhere, unless there's nothing that is better for him and he decides to come back. But even then, I don't even know if the Cowboys would want him to. We'll see, man. We'll see. But yeah, I think the fumbles are the biggest argument going against Cooper Rush at this moment. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that will be it for me tonight here on the show. I'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you for being here. Hit the like button for me, and I will see you Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday with quick hitting videos, and then back on Thursday live talking some Cowboys football. We'll see if we can get a guest on the show and maybe get someone to talk to about these Dallas Cowboys. See you then. Bye-bye.